Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty important, I think, for anyone working today. It's this often blurry line between psychological safety and just, well, being comfortable.
It really is blurry for a lot of people.
Yeah, and we were looking at this recent piece from Phoenix Performance Partner, Safety versus Comfort, understanding the difference, and it really hits on something.
Mm-hmm.
Get this. A huge number, like 70% of employees say they actually hold back from speaking up at work.
70%. That's massive. It tells you something's not quite right.
Exactly. And it just shows why we need to, really understand what's actually going on. What is genuine safety versus just avoiding the tough stuff.
Right. And that's kind of the goal for this deep dive, isn't it? Not just to define psychological safety again, but to get really clear on what it isn't.
Okay.
Specifically, it's not about making sure everyone feels, cozy and unchallenged all the time.
Right. Not perpetual comfort.
No.
Mm.
We want to explore how fostering real psychological safety actually creates the space for growth, even when that growth involves some, let's call it, productive discomfort.
Productive discomfort. I like that framing. And the article argues exactly that safety isn't about feeling good constantly. It's more about having that bedrock of trust.
Yeah, trust and security. So you feel like, okay, I can actually take a risk here. I can be a bit vulnerable, and that's how you develop, right?
Totally. And a key thing they point out, which really struck me, is that leaders who are serious about growth, they get that pushing outside the comfort zone is, well, often necessary.
It's almost unavoidable if you want real progress.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit more. The article talks about something called the comfort trap. They even start with this story about a new CEO, Tom.
Ah, yes, Tom. And his initial approach, it sounds, well, pretty familiar, doesn't it? Steps in, wants to make things smooth, wants everyone to feel comfortable.
Like pleasant meetings, maybe not super direct communication,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Exactly. You can picture it.
Yeah,
Very agreeable.
we've all probably been in environments like that, haven't we? But Tom, apparently, he started feeling like something wasn't quite working.
He even mentions retreating to his office, just focusing on his own tasks, which is telling.
Yeah. But then, thankfully, it sounds like he got some pretty straight advice from mentors.
Crucial advice. Basically, that real leadership isn't always comfortable for the leader or for the team.
And that makes you think, doesn't it? Have you, listening now, ever sort of equated a comfortable place with a place that's actually productive or even truly safe?
It's an easy assumption to make. But Tom had this light bulb moment, realizing comfort and safety just aren't the same thing.
He figured out his main job was actually about unlocking potential.
Right. And that often means guiding people, gently, maybe, but guiding them beyond what feels easy or familiar.
So let's nail down this difference then. How does the article define comfort versus psychological safety?
Okay, so comfort, they describe it as basically the absence of challenge. No tension. You're just staying in your lane, doing what you always do.
Your habitual behaviors.
Exactly. Now, psychological safety, and they use Amy Edmondson's definition here, is that belief, that shared belief that you won't get punished or, humiliated if you speak up.
With ideas, questions.
Concerns, mistakes, all of it.
Hmm.
It's about feeling safe to contribute without fear of negative consequences to yourself.
Okay, and crucially, the article really underlines this. Edmondson's definition says nothing about a lack of discomfort.
Not a word. It's a really important distinction. Because think about it. Real growth almost always involves feeling a bit out of your depth.
Like learning anything new and substantial.
Precisely. You're probably going to feel confused sometimes, maybe frustrated. You might feel vulnerable, like you don't quite know what you're doing yet.
Yeah, those uncomfortable bits are often where the learning happens. The aha moments.
Exactly. They're catalysts.
Which leads us nicely into this other concept the article brings up, psychological courage. I thought this was a really interesting counterpoint to safety.
It really is.
Yeah.
If you think about it, psychological safety is what the organization, the leaders, need to provide. That's the environment,
The foundation.
right? But psychological courage, that's on the individual.
Mm.
It's the willingness to actually use that safety, to step into the discomfort zone for a good reason.
So the organization builds the net.
But the individual has to be willing to jump. And the article notes this tendency sometimes for people to just wait for perfect comfort.
As if any unease is a danger signal.
Yeah, misinterpreting discomfort as actual danger and maybe sort of externalizing it like, it's not safe enough yet for me to speak.
There's a quote in there from Brad, I think.
Yes, Brad's quote. It nails it. Growth and development always require that we operate outside our comfort zone. If we are to grow, we must be motivated by something more compelling than our commitment to comfort.
Something more compelling than comfort. That's powerful. It makes me think about, just basic brain wiring. The article mentions this fear-comfort connection.
Yeah, and there's a real biological reason for it.
Yeah.
Our brains are kind of hardwired to see comfort is safe. It's old programming, survival
You
stuff,
stay in the cave where it's warm.
basically. So when we step outside that familiar zone, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, it can light up like we're facing a predator, even if it's just, giving feedback.
Right. And the article clarifies that the dangers at work usually aren't lions and tigers, they're social threats.
Exactly. Fear of looking stupid, fear of rejection, fear of being criticized, that sort of thing.
But the brain doesn't always make that distinction super clearly.
Unfortunately, no. Social threat can feel just as real biologically as physical threat. And this is where great leadership comes in, right? Helping people tell the difference
Between,
between productive discomfort, like wrestling with a new idea, getting constructive feedback, and genuine psychological danger. Things like being belittled, blamed, or punished unfairly.
that distinction is everything. And they illustrate this with the case study, right? A healthcare organization.
Yeah, it's a good one. It sounds like they had this culture that was almost too nice, like excessively nice.
Pleasant meetings, but
But the really important stuff wasn't getting talked about. Avoidance. The CEO thought she'd made it safe because it was comfortable.
the comfort was actually hiding the lack of real safety and hindering progress.
Exactly that. It was actually getting in the way of addressing problems and improving patient care, which is obviously critical in healthcare.
So what changed? They went through some kind of leadership program.
Yeah, a transformational leadership program. And that helped them really grasp this difference, comfort versus real safety.
And what happened? What were the results?
Well, the article says within about 6 months, things really started to shift.
Oh, wow. 6 months.
Yeah. People started having those necessary but difficult conversations they'd been dodging. Concerns were getting raised earlier before they blew up.
That makes sense. Fewer crises.
Right. And crucially, they saw actual improvements in performance metrics that had been stuck for ages.
And that CEO's quote is pretty telling, isn't it?
It really is. She said something like, "I thought I was creating safety by keeping things comfortable. Now I understand that real safety is knowing you can speak difficult truths and still be valued."
Still be valued. That's the core of it.
Yeah.
It's a huge mindset shift.
A massive shift. And the article talks about the shifts needed to get there.
Yeah.
Moving away from fear of retribution, for instance, towards that security, knowing you can speak up without getting punished, and moving away from blame culture.
The blame game.
Yeah, shifting that towards personal responsibility, asking, okay, how am I part of the solution here? What can I do?
Instead of just pointing fingers.
Exactly. And one more, moving from like drama and unhelpful reaction.
Here's what they call radical acceptance.
Yeah, basically accepting the reality of the situation, even if it's tough, so you can actually respond productively instead of just reacting emotionally.
Okay. But these shifts, they don't just magically happen.
Great. Not. The article is clear. This takes conscious, deliberate leadership.
So what can leaders practically do? What are the takeaways for them?
Well, there's some great concrete advice. First off, leaders need to model vulnerability themselves.
Brain.
Share their own mistakes. Talk about what they learned. It shows it's okay not to be perfect. Also, how they react to bad news is huge.
Right. Do they shoot the messenger?
Or do they see it as data, as an opportunity to learn and improve? Big difference. And when giving feedback, focus on the performance or the behavior, not attacking the person.
Person versus performance. Got it.
And really importantly, publicly recognize and appreciate it when someone does show courage, when they speak up, especially if it's uncomfortable.
Reinforce that behavior.
Exactly. And finally, make sure there are actual ways for everyone to give input, not just the loudest voices. Create those structured opportunities.
Makes sense. Okay, what about for the rest of us? As individuals on a team, how do we build that psychological courage?
Good question. The article has tips for individuals too. A big one is just learning to recognize that feeling uncomfortable isn't the same as being in danger.
Building that awareness.
Yeah. Tuning in. Am I avoiding this because it's genuinely risky or just because it feels a bit awkward or difficult? Connecting to a bigger purpose can help too. Why is it important to speak up or try this new thing, even if it's uncomfortable?
Right, the why.
Yeah. And start small. You don't have to make huge leaps immediately. Build those courage muscles gradually. Ask for feedback on your impact, not just whether you meant well. That can be eye-opening. And they talk about practicing micro-courage.
Micro courage.
Yeah, just finding those small, everyday chances to voice a different perspective, ask a clarifying question, little things that build confidence.
I like that. Okay, so if we're trying to build this culture, how do we know if we're succeeding? How do we measure real psychological safety, not just, fake comfort?
That's key. We need to look for the signs, the indicators.
Yeah.
What does genuine safety look like in action?
Like what?
Well, healthy disagreement is a big one.
Hmm.
Are people willing to debate ideas constructively,
Yeah.
challenge each other respectfully?
Not just nodding along.
Definitely not. Also, error reporting. Do people feel safe admitting mistakes so the team can learn, or do they hide them?
Huge difference.
Massive. Are questions welcomed? Are assumptions challenged? Does information flow up, down, sideways, or only top down?
Good points.
And ultimately, you'd expect to see these things connect to better innovation, faster problem solving, real results.
Right, it should actually improve performance, not just feel nice.
Exactly.
The article wraps up with this idea of the transformational choice. It sort of brings it all home.
It really does. It frames the choice for leaders clearly. It's not safety or comfort. It's about building the kind of psychological safety that makes it okay to embrace productive discomfort.
The discomfort needed for growth.
Yes, because, as they say, transformation doesn't happen deep inside the comfort zone. It happens out at the edge.
So if we boil it down, the big takeaway is psychological safety is the launch pad for growth. It's not about bubble wrap.
Not bubble wrap, no. It's about building a strong enough foundation that people feel secure enough to stretch, to try, to maybe stumble, and to speak up.
And thinking back to that 70% statistic, wow, understanding this difference feels like maybe the crucial first step leaders and teams need to take to start changing that number.
I think so. It reframes the entire goal.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought for you listening. Think about a time you really grew, learned something significant, achieved something hard. Was it comfortable?
Probably not entirely right.
Yeah.
So what made it possible for you to push through that discomfort? Was there a sense of safety underneath it all? And how can you use these ideas, safety and courage for yourself, and maybe in how you interact with others, to foster more of that good, productive, transformative discomfort?
A great question to ponder. Makes you really think about what true support for growth looks like.